All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. We really appreciate you attending this event and buying books if you have already. Your attendance lets us keep having these events, and we really love them, so thank you so much. This evening, we have the honor of hearing from Amy Rowland following the launch of her latest novel, Inside the Wolf, with Daniel Wallace. Amy is the author of 2 novels. The Transcriptionist received the Addison M. Metcalf Award from the American Academy of the Arts and Letters. She is the recipient of fellowships and residencies from the National Endowment for the Arts, the MacDowell Colony, the Norman Mailer Center, and the SUNY Writers Conference. Daniel Wallace is the author of 6 novels, including Big Fish, which was adapted and released as a movie and a Broadway musical. He is the J. Ross McDonald Distinguished Professor of English at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Thank you again. Remember, you can get a copy of Inside the Wolf up front if you have not already. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, I'm so happy to be here with you, Amy. We've never met before. This is the first time, so you'll be able to witness us just getting to know each other at a cocktail party. Yeah. I don't know nothing about you, so what do you do? You're a writer. Oh, that's so fascinating. Let's just start out with you giving a kind of an elevator pitch for your book and reading a selection, so everybody's in the same place.
Okay. So this is the only thing I've ever written that has an elevator pitch. So I'm gonna give it, and I can do it in one sentence, I think.
One sentence. Whoa.
This book is about the accidental shootings of 2 children in the South, 30 years apart, and the aftermath. So, yeah, it's not a happy read. But let me read from the beginning, just a couple of pages, and that will set the scene, I think. I buried a wolf today. Last night's lightning downed the pin oak by the ditch, and the wolf must not have known to move in time. He was still lying there this morning, a reddish rug under the toppled trunk, grimacing with meat-tearing teeth. It's remarkably bad luck that he sheltered under the one tree felled by the storm. Perhaps he passed at the exact moment it hit the ground, but the odds of that seem even slimmer. I paused on my morning walk, bending to stroke his head, bony under the damp fur. Deciding where to wait it out is dangerous sometimes. I buried him on the old place where the stick barn used to stand. It collapsed into the ground years ago, and there's not a trace of the tar-papered barn, not a plank of sash-sawn wood. I wish I had an editing pencil up here.
Yeah.
Without a trace, that's not true. A circle of dirt sits between the field and the woods as though swept clean. No grass grows in this spot. It's as barren as the devil's tramping ground. The barn is gone, but the mind knows something was there. The burial was hard work. I had to ferry the wolf across the yard in a wheelbarrow and heave him onto the tarp in the trough bed. His grave is not deep, but it took all morning to dig. A strange first act as a farm owner. Besides, I didn't want the body to attract all manner of scavengers. Besides, soon it would start to smell.
So that's a great beginning for this book because it creates this really, really solid image of where you are, the place, the feeling of the place, and where you are really is the heart of the book. Where this story may not could have happened in another place in America, possibly. So much was going on that seems peculiarly or particularly Southern. The wolf is right there in the very first sentence and makes appearances throughout the book during some highly charged scenes and moments. And obviously you you had the title. Did the title come first, second, last? What?
Title came last, thanks to my agent, who said my title was not going to work.
Does anybody want to hear the title that didn't work? Yeah.
Well, at the time, I thought it was a good idea. But, so my title was Soiled, because it's set in a farming community. It's about, the history of violence in the South, to the land and to the people. And,
I've gone through like 1,000 different titles.
I thought this seemed like a fitting, good idea. And, I explained all that to my agent, how it worked on several different levels, symbolic and metaphoric, and, all these things that evoked. And she said, yes. And it also evokes poop. And I don't think we can ask the marketing team to do that.
Yeah.
And so we went back and forth and came up with Inside the Wolf, which is probably a more fitting title.
Possibly. But that's why we have editors.
That's right.
If we just tossed our stuff out as we came, as we wrote it, I don't think things would end up nearly as good. I do think this is a good title for the book. So it came very last. It seems so, to me, it seems so perfect for it though, because the wolf is such an integral, and as you said, I mean, it's metaphorical, but it's also very, very real. Digging a little deeper on the wolf, where did the wolf come in the writing process? Was it there from the beginning too?
It was there from the beginning. I mean, I'm fascinated with red wolves and their symbolism, and so I knew that was something I wanted to explore, and I also like the idea of the wolf as sort of the imagined villain, and all that that symbolizes too, and also the idea of, there's a question in the book if the wolf actually exists, right?
Right.
And so I wanted that to be throughout also, to raise the question about the narrator, but also about the existence of these, symbols in our lives, in our childhood, in our communities, and how we think about them, and how we navigate that gap between what exists and what doesn't.
Exactly, and it also dovetails really nicely with a lot of the literature that has historically come out of the South, this sense of the magical, the darkness, something that we can't really know for sure but believe, tall tales. That's what so much of Southern writing is made of. Tonally though, this does not read, like what you would generically call it, a Southern novel, even though the narrator's from the South, takes place completely in the South. It has Southern, the ideas that it investigates are uniquely Southern, or maybe not uniquely Southern, but on the face of it Southern. But the tone of it, the way it's written, is not in that voice. It's a voice of somebody that feels like they're not from the South. Did you have any sense of that when you were writing it?
No, I had the sense of it as the voice of someone who returns and feels,
right.
Sort of displaced. But I didn't, I felt that she was a Southerner. I mean, I felt that the voice was Southern, but I also felt that I wanted to use a different sort of language and style than the Southern fiction I grew up with.
Right.
So maybe that affected the tone.
Well, and also part of it is Rachel herself. To tell us her story, because she hasn't been in her hometown for a while, for
Right.
very long. So what's
Right.
her story?
So she left. She fled. She was going to be a New York academic. But the fact that she chose to study Southern folklore, I think, reveals kind of the potentially self-destructive nature of that plan. Right? And so she returns, when in the wake of family loss. She's lost her parents and her brother, and so she goes back thinking she won't stay, and then she gets drawn deeper in, and she decides to try to make a go of it.
So she tried to get out.
She tried to get out,
Yeah.
and she failed.
It's like the mafia. Something happens to bring her back in.
Yeah, that's right.
And at first, she comes in with the perspective of an outsider in a way, or an insider who is an outsider coming back.
Right.
Who's seen within the community as an interloper, even in a way, not completely, but seems like that is who she is in the beginning anyway. That's seen as somebody that's not really a part of things yet or anymore.
Right. Right. And I think that part is very true to life. Both the way people feel and the way they're received. But, yeah, she can't get away, she can't go back, but then she decides eventually she has to make a choice, and she has to make an effort, which, I was really thinking about a lot when I was writing it, because, I don't live in the South anymore, and I probably won't, but I wondered what it would be like if someone, not me, but like me, certain characteristics, were to return to a rural area, what that would look like.
So it was a what-if exercise you gave yourself.
Yeah, at the beginning anyway, yeah. But then, you live with it for years and it turns into something entirely different.
Right. So this is your second book. And the second book in a writer's journey has a special weight to it. And I'm sure I'm assuming that writing the second book was a lot different for you than writing the first one. Was it?
Different how?
Different how in that for me, nobody, before writing a first book, nobody even knows that you're a writer at all. And then once you publish that, you have a track record, and then people are wondering when the second book is coming, and your first book, well received, how's the second book going to go? And there's this pressure that you have that you don't have in the first book.
True. Yeah, yeah. It's called the sophomore slump for a reason. It's really hard. After the first book, I was going to write, another New York novel. Was going to have more characters, plot, big plot. It was, and then 3 years later, it was just dead on the page. It was just so dead, and there's nothing you can do about that. Eventually, and so I had been taking notes for a long time on a Southern novel, and so but a Southern novel is a fraught thing, and but then I decided, to just try it and see where it went. So yeah, so the second one panned out, but that New York novel is really in a drawer.
I think the writing life that you've, there are two things that you've said that are really interesting to me, is that you can work for a really long time on a book 3 years and then realize, well, this isn't working. I can't, this thing that I've done, I've got to put it away, and start something completely new. And then even closer to this moment, she's reading from her published novel, and she's editing it. So, don't you think that's interesting? You spent a few years with this book,
Yeah.
and then you're reading it now, and you're thinking, I wish I hadn't done that.
That's the problem. That's why I only have 2 books, and I'm wearing progressive lenses. This is a problem.
It is a problem, yeah. And it's probably good, in my experience, is to pick those 2 pages to read from. Don't read anything else, because then you'll just never, you're just like, I'm giving up. There's so much wrong with this book.
I know. And then I worked for a newspaper, so I really think, I could do that novel in 850 words. If anybody wants a 1,000-word novel, I can do it.
Yeah.
I think so.
I bet you could. I bet that'd be great. I would love to read a 1,000-word long novel. That'd be great. Or even a triptych, a 3,000 long series.
Trilogy.
Yeah, quartet.
Yeah.
I would go that. I've never known what comes after quartet. What is it? Quintet, and then what's next? Septet. Okay. Good to have a publisher here.
That's right.
It'd be great to just have one person representing every field. Yeah. What is the screw called when you're trying to do the plumb?
We've got one of those.
We do?
Yeah.
That's great. So you talked about your elevator pitch book, which was not incorrect, but to me, there's so much more going on in this book than it's even, in the book itself. This is how they pitch it. The two accidental deaths 30 years apart. But it's also, to me, about the spooky insularity of small southern towns. It's about the good and the bad parts of the community who knows you well, too well sometimes. It's about change. It's about how we understand the past and how everybody understands it differently. Generational guilt, I think that's really a big part of it. But to get to all that, it's a really long elevator ride, right? Did we touch on that? Do these themes, these ideas, and not even the conflicts that you set up, did they arise through just as the days and weeks and months passed as you're writing it? Did they naturally arise from the story?
They did, over a period of years, though. I rewrote this novel at least 7 times.
And now an 8th.
Yeah, I'm starting on the 8th tonight. I've got my copy. I've got lots of pencils in my pajamas.
Yeah.
But then it was different in the beginning. It was more focused on the narrator's interiority, which is a tendency of mine. And but as I wrote and got to know the characters, then the events and the conflicts arose in the writing, but over a long period of time.
I had marked one passage, an additional passage for Amy to read, and I'm glad that I checked it out with her beforehand, because she said, "Oh, that would be too emotional for me to read," because it is incredibly emotional seeing this. That it's written in such a kind of studied, calm way that elicits emotion from the reader, which is what you're trying to do. You're trying to make them feel it. But you were saying for you, even, it would be hard to read. Why is that? I mean, you wrote it. I mean, you just you invented the scene, and
Yeah, well, it's a very emotional book. I mean,
Yeah.
and also, I mean, you're sitting in a room killing kids.
Yeah.
I mean, like,
It's tough.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's tough. And the second violent incident wasn't even the first few drafts. I didn't even write it. It takes place, off stage because I couldn't.
Right.
It's difficult, but it seemed necessary. So I went through draft by draft and tried to do it in a way that was that made sense, that wasn't sensationalized. But,
Yeah. Well, I think death scenes like that and sex scenes are the two hardest scenes to
Oh, yeah.
write, because it's just awkward and awkward on the one hand, and the other hand, it's also so dramatic
Yeah.
when somebody gets shot.
Yeah.
That, I mean, I'm assuming that you went over that scene quite a bit.
Quite a bit. Although the one scene in the middle of the book, it had a kernel in some of the first things I wrote. I had 3 kids in the woods when I first started writing, and I knew it's just been there for years in my mind, and I finally was able to, but I didn't know where it belonged, or how it fit in. That's how it goes. It's a lot of, groping in the dark, and then you finally realize sometimes, whose story it is, and where it fits, and how it unfolds. So, in some of the earliest things I wrote back in my 20s that didn't turn into a book, it was 3 kids in the woods.
Yeah.
And then when I was at Princeton, I met another writer, and we were talking about, our work and what we liked and didn't like. And I said, she was writing this really, sophisticated, intricate novel. And I said, well, what do you hate? And she said, kids in the woods. She's like, that's done. No more kids in the woods. And then she said, what are you writing? And I said, kids in the woods.
I never really thought of that theme as being a tired one.
She's like, it's dark, something violent's gonna happen. I was like, yeah, that's the one. That's it.
Did you come away with this experience of putting this urban novel aside and moving to this book, which obviously you went the distance with, that you were absorbed in for the reasons, the image, the idea that you were just talking about, and also this, I'm assuming your experiences and your own world growing up in the South. Does it make you feel like probably gonna just write more about the South, or because that just feels like where I'm more comfortable?
I'm not more comfortable there, and that's probably why I'm going to write about it.
Yeah. At the end of the Sound and the Fury, I think Quentin Thompson, who also went to Princeton, didn't he? Yeah, he went to Harvard. It was Harvard.
Harvard.
Thank you. I'm so glad you're here. No, I'm so glad you're here. Move up to the front row. Thank Harvard. He, at the end of the book, he says, "I don't hate the South. I don't hate." He says it over and over and over. Would you say the same thing? I mean, we know that he's torn, right? He's very torn about his feelings, and that leads to
No, I hate it sometimes.
Yeah.
But that's pointless. So I don't hate it too. I think I have unresolved feelings about it. That's why I write.
Yeah. And that's what gives you it compels you to investigate it, because you're investigating yourself at the same time.
Absolutely.
Your first book, though, your first novel was The Transcriptionist, which was more of a urban thing, because you were actually a transcriptionist.
I was.
Which is, you were almost the last one in the world, right?
It was definitely near the end of the line on that path to obsolescence.
So what was that job like?
I mean, it was a soul-numbing job, but also in some ways interesting. I transcribed, tapes or news conferences or political debates, or, we had reporters on the street, or we had reporters in Afghanistan, and so they would call in. I mean, it was quite archaic even at the time, but it was well, as someone who wanted to be a writer, it was a union job first of all, and so I had my foot in the door at the Times, but it was. But it was difficult. It's difficult to listen to the news all day, coming, in your ear and out your fingers. But it was one of those strange desk jobs like you read in an Eastern European novel by a sad, person with yellow socks and pale skin.
I think you're describing Kafka. I think he had yellow socks and pale skin. So it's a soul-numbing, soul-crushing job that you wrote a novel about.
Yeah.
So wouldn't you want to move? What was it about
so where
the soul?
do you go from there?
Yeah.
That's why it's 8 years later. But no, but in honesty, I mean, I was trying to learn how to write a novel, and I can see now that it was influenced heavily by a lot of things that I was reading. And also, looking back on it now, I think it has a certain irony that I don't love, but I really, at the time, I'm interested in work, and I thought it was an interesting thing to explore.
Mm-hmm.
This kind of lost newspaper worker living, in a sort of New York that you can recognize, but also feels off kilter. So I wanted to explore that.
Were you reading any particular books when you were writing this book? Do you read a lot when you're writing, or?
I do. I read a lot all the time. But I wasn't reading a lot of Southern fiction when I was writing it. Because, the anxiety of influence, right? But also, I just wanted to try to find a new language to write about the South. I mean, not that I did, but just in my own way, a way that I could write about it. So.
You have, you're from North Carolina, went to school here, went to UNCG.
Yeah.
No, where was the next time?
You mean in life or in school?
In school.
Well,
We're just gonna whisper for now.
I moved to New York, and I went to a really bad. Yeah, I went to Sarah Lawrence and got an MFA, and
Well, there are some Southern writers teaching there, right?
well, there weren't then.
There weren't anymore?
Yeah.
There used to be.
Yeah. Well, in fairness, I moved to New York City, and I commuted to Bronxville
Mhm.
as little as possible, so I was not on campus a lot. But
You wanted to be, you studied writing here.
no.
You didn't do it at all. When did the idea then to be a writer really set sail for you?
I always wanted to be a writer.
Mhm.
I just didn't know if I could do it.
Did you hate the idea of workshop?
Yes.
Oh, I did too. I hated it. I hated workshopping. It was miserable.
It's the worst. And now I teach them.
Me too.
And I feel bad for everybody, both sides now.
It's awful. Yeah. That's our job. We do this thing we hate. Like being a transcriptionist.
Well, no, I don't hate it, but the workshop setting, yeah, we really need to blow that up.
What would you rather it be? So the workshop, for those of you not familiar with that, is that the students bring their work in, their stories in, everybody in class reads them, and then everybody talks about them in front of you. So it's like hold it, if you went
And you can't say anything.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Yeah.
You can't, definitely can't defend yourself. So it's like, those of you who haven't been through this, it's like if you taking a geography test or biology test, and the teacher's saying, "So, Amy, let's show everybody your B, and why you did so poorly on this, whatever." It's tough. What would you rather do other than that? How would you rather teach your class?
Well, it's tricky because I still do think there's some value in it. You can often find one or two readers, like I'll be in Greensboro tomorrow with a friend of mine from graduate school. You find one or two readers, who you trust, and that's helpful. And then you learn how to, sort through criticism and what's helpful and what's not, and you learn how to meet a deadline and turn in something. So I think it's helpful in that way, and I think the most helpful thing really is for the students maybe is is teaching close reading, how to read closely.
Yeah.
I think there's great value in that for writers and for all of us.
Well, I've been asking too many questions. I think I want to hear any questions that we have out of the audience for Amy about her book, or about anything. I can ask you anything.
No. I have family members.
Well, it was directed towards them. Yeah.
I have a question. Of course, Danny went for the most difficult, painful passage to discuss, but I'm curious about what part of writing the book was the most fun or came the easiest?
My one regret is, and I was thinking about that sitting up here talking about it, is that there wasn't a lot of room for humor in this book.
Yeah.
Because the tone needed to be consistent, and so that it's not exactly a loss, but that made writing something about grave and serious topics that doesn't have much of a opening for lighter moments that was probably the toughest part.
Yeah, but what was the most fun for you to write? What came the easiest? Was it describing the landscape or revisiting scenes from your past?
I think the most fun was feeling immersed in a world. Feeling immersed in a world and feeling that, feeling characters come to life. Would you say, or do you have fun writing?
Well, I have both fun moments and moments. I do crack myself up sometimes. I do. I mean, not that it's that even stays in the book necessarily, but I do have fun coming up with words. It's fun. Yeah. It's just harder, and it's just hard to start. That's the hardest part. Is just sit down, and once I sit down and don't think of something else to do instead of write, then I exhaust all the possibilities. I've done all the sweeping I can possibly do. Then I do enjoy it.
So Amy, you kind of balance something like that with the other things you do, like the article on Bee's Barbecue in Greenville for Garden and Gun. Is that kind of how you achieve balance between the very deep and the fun?
I did not achieve good balance during the writing of this book, but going forward, I want to achieve a better balance. I was writing this book. I started it before, but I was writing and rewriting the serious drafts during the pandemic. So I don't think that was the most balanced time, but I like that idea.
A balance.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're attracted to this impossible idea.
Speaking of going forward, are you taking a break, or do you have an idea for what's next?
Yeah, I'm working on something. I got a little obsessed with one of the characters, the minor characters in this novel, named Vasta, and so she's on a rampage, really. So I don't know. I think I'm straying into thriller territory. But,
Same setting?
same setting.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah, that is fun.
There you go. You have to dig deeper, Nick, to get to the fun part. Yeah.
So we're from the same place, and so as I listened to you read, I thought, I know where she's talking about. I was just curious, was there a specific place an actual place in your past that was a source of inspiration or something that you kept going back to in writing?
Definitely, in my mind anyway. So this novel takes place really not in the town that we're from. I mean, although that's alluded to, that's like the big city, but the actual setting is a farming community outside of the town, where I spent a lot of my childhood. Pine Town, North Carolina, an unincorporated hamlet, even smaller than the big metropolis we're from, of about 10,000. I think it has about, 200 or 300 people, probably, population. So that was the place that I was returning to in my mind too, because we couldn't travel during the last drafts of the novel. So, but I did. I realized that, again, me with, I guess, names and titles. This is a pattern, perhaps, but I thought of the town as shallow, and so I called it Shallow, and so it had to be shallow. But of course, there's a real Shallow, North Carolina, but it's not the shallow that I was writing about. So then the editor and I had this back and forth about how we should have words that, this is Shallow, North Carolina, but it's not the actual Shallow, North Carolina. It's, my imaginative Shallow, North Carolina. And she's like, you could just change the name. And I was like, no. We changed the title, but I can't change the name of the town. So.
I have a question both for Amy and for Daniel as writers. I'm always impressed in a really good book how the writer is able to capture different characters, completely different voices through dialogue. Was that hard to learn? Is that something you just have to practice? Or is it something you writers are good at?
I think dialogue is really hard. I think it's really hard, and I think it's a matter of writing and drafting and practicing. But I also think, when you spend time with a character and they do have a certain voice, that is distinct. What would you say?
Well, it is so crucial in a book using dialogue to create a character, because the way we talk defines us in so many ways. So getting that voice down is important. And writing dialogue that sounds like the way we talk, even though it's nothing like the way we talk at all. And that's really tricky, and that is something that does come, I think, from practice, but also just listening a lot to people, not talking and listening to people talk. I think editing, again, we show our stuff to other people, and I have been edited in a way that two characters might sound too much alike, and I have to mix it up a little bit just to make them more distinctive. But you're absolutely right. It's really difficult.
Then just a follow-up question to that, and because Amy writes an older woman's voice, a kid's voice, a man's voice, is it easier for you, Daniel, as a man to write in a man's voice? Is it difficult to write a child's voice or a woman's voice, or again, is it just something that you develop?
Well, for me, I think it's not as challenging to write just dialogue between two characters, one who is male, one who is female. The challenge for me in writing a female character is if I was having a novel narrated or the main character was female, because that would be more than just how they talk. It would be how they think and how they feel, which is a great leap of imagination. That I've been listening. Three sisters. I've been listening to women talk for a really long time. I've got a good idea on how that works.
Thank you.
You talked about having written this novel set in New York and setting it aside. At the same time, you would always have had the idea of the kids in the woods. What did you take away? Did you take anything away from that novel that you put aside or work against it when you came back to the story about the kids, or what drew you? I'm just wondering the progression of how you came to this book.
It's hard. It's a hard question because in some ways it's slightly mysterious, and I feel that now I could say, I woke up on May 16th of 2017 and I said, this novel is dead and I'm going to write this Southern novel about this. But it was more, there were certain images in my mind, and it was almost like the Southern novel was something I wrote, on the sly, not something I was going to do because I didn't want to take it on. But then, you realize that some of your writing, when something has life in it and when it doesn't. And so that first line came to me, and as soon as I wrote it, I knew that was a voice that I wanted to follow. And so then I just started building slowly from there. So it was a combination of things. I know that's not terribly coherent, but it wasn't a terribly coherent process. It was more, I had this image that I couldn't let go of. And I had, I wrote that the first couple of pages came pretty whole. And then I really didn't want to let go of the New York novel, but I put it aside and then I reread it, and then I just knew that it wasn't going to work. And this is couldn't be more different. I mean, there's no commonality that I can see at all. So.
Do you feel more comfortable? I mean, you're talking about writing, like part of the motivation for writing a Southern novel is to work through those unresolved feelings. I mean, was there always kind of a resistance to wanting to write? I mean, from my own experience, I also feel a certain anxiety around the idea of writing a Southern novel and what that brings of expectations. But do you feel a little more comfortable in that? I mean, obviously you're writing another book set in that space, but
yeah.
Or does it change the idea of what that means for you? I guess.
Yeah, that's a good question and a hard one.
Like, does the idea of a Southern writer feel different to you now, having written this book? I guess is the other
right.
Less of a pressure.
Yeah. It feels. It feels like you have to claim it.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's. Now I've done it, and now I want to do it again. Because that's an area that I want to keep exploring. And I think there's a lot more to explore. And, so I wrote this, first one, and I worked through some things, but then it opened up lots of other things. And about the Southern writer as a label, it really, for a long time, it meant too much, and now it really doesn't mean much to me anymore. I'm an American writer, I'm a Southern writer, I'm a regional writer. I think that is, now that's charged too, right? But I think I'm ready to embrace it because that's what interests me.
Do you think that these definitions are diminishing for a writer? I think you said, I'm just a writer, I'm an American writer. It's a much larger canvas.
Yeah, well, I don't know if it's diminishing or irrelevant. But then again, it's not, right? Because it is a part of the work. Like, place is incredibly important to this novel. It is a very Southern novel. So I don't mind the definition of the label. I just think, they're great writers and works of literature from everywhere, right? So, I guess I don't care so much about the label anymore. But I also understand it, because it's sort of unavoidable.
My part, I've been reduced to just being the tallest writer in Chapel Hill. That's it.
I would love that. I would
Oh, that would be meaningful.
I could be the shortest, maybe.
Oh, I don't see that on the book.
Can I pick up on, so you both have the shared the experience of being published by Algonquin as well, and it occurred to me this conversation about Southernness, like most people don't look at the spine of the book when they buy it, but the book industry cares a lot about it, and I'm just reflecting on, I think there was a time probably when your first book was published when Algonquin was very much conceived as a hotbed of producing it, and it is much less, much more cosmopolitan now, I think. But it's still, the book industry wants to put you in those boxes because they have to pitch it to the buyer at Barnes & Noble and say, well, it's like this meets this. And so I don't really have a question. It's just like I'm acknowledging that you kind of know there needs to be categorization, and yet you bristle at being categorized. Right.
Yeah, I do feel like it's a marketing ploy more than almost anything.
Yeah.
you want to have a completely original novel that's just like 100 Years of Solitude, you know, or you want to have there has to be the legitimate child of Catcher in the Rye and Catch-22. You know, it's and Algonquin authentically was a predominantly, I mean, actually completely Southern publisher when it started out. But if you look at the list now, it's not at all. Very few Southern writers on there. Is that not right, Travis?
That's accurate. But I would say that we still we still want to retain some of the original Southernness. So I think maybe you might see more proportionally to how big our list is than other publishers similar size, like from North Carolina. You know, still publish Lisa and Jim.
So Travis is in marketing at Algonquin, and you see how he just had it. Yes, we're incredibly cosmopolitan, but we're also really quite Southern.
Elevator pitch.
Yeah. We're right for everybody. We're like there used to be a car place in town that said specializes in domestic and foreign cars. That's Algonquin. So we have time for one short, brilliant question. Yes.
Well, that's the story of the cover. Where did the cover art come from?
Oh, well, that was Algonquin's work. They assigned it to a really talented designer, and she came up with something very similar to this right off the bat. And you know, I like it a lot. I don't really know how that works, and so I really admire and appreciate people who can do it. I did make just a couple of suggestions because the artist had never seen a tobacco plant, and this is a tobacco plant, and you know, I said I'm all for artistic representation. I just want to point out that it had a brown stalk, it was like a little tree, and I said, you know, it's beautiful. It just doesn't look like a tobacco plant, but yeah. But she tweaked it, and it's really beautiful, and it's sort of abstract, but you also know what she was going for. So
Brilliant. All right, one more.
Amy, I just want to point out that all of the letters from your original title are in the new title.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Soil?
Yeah.
And Inside Book. So you got your title in there.
It's in there. It's soil.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you.
Thank all of you too.
Thank you.